doing today? This is a great audience. I can tell that I'm completely overdressed. Because normally you come to museum events and you have to wear a tie, or most people are wearing ties. And so this means that the actual doers inside of government and the contractors and vendors, the actual doers are in the room, which is absolutely fantastic. So we're going to have a great fireside chat with David Shive. For those of you who don't know him, he is the CIO of GSA. And so this is actually a really special treat. Dave doesn't come out very much and talk on the speaking circuit. He's got his head down getting stuff done. And I absolutely love and adore that. That is one of my favorite things. He's just driving real change. And I'll tell you a little secret. Like, we've got a lot of things going on in the IT modernization agenda, right? So we have a report that came out in December. We have these 5 centers of excellence. We have a Modernizing Government Technology Act. I'm probably missing 2 or 3 different things. So all these things are going on. But having been a staffer for 4 years inside the presidency, I'll tell you, they're not written in a vacuum, right? We don't just kind of write them and then say, go off agencies. They're written about things that are actually getting done, right? They are an encapsulation of the best practices of the leading agencies and formalizing those. So a lot of what you see is what Dave has been driving heads down at GSA. So I'm super fired up. He's here. We have a quick fireside chat. I want to change up the way we do chats. So instead of me asking him a bunch of questions and then you guys have a few questions at the end, I want to know what's on your mind. What do you want David to respond to? What's top of mind in your agency, in your opportunity, as you're thinking about containers, driving transformation? Tell me, raise your hand right now and tell me, what do you want me to ask Dave, or what do you want Dave to respond to? Yes, sir. Is GSA the only agency using Docker? Okay, other questions? We're going to get a bunch of them, and then we're going to, yes?
If you could wave a magic wand, what would you change at GSA?
What would you change at GSA?
Add questions from plans.
Yes. Other questions? Come on. It's a special treat. He's going to reveal all his secrets on how to get it done.
What went into choosing Docker Enterprise versus other competitors like OpenShift?
Okay. I don't know that we'll be able to get too deep into those kinds of decisions, but maybe we'll talk a little bit about it. Yeah.
Container platforms, a lot of things out there are like PaaS solutions, SaaS solutions, trying to abstract away what's really happening. Why is there so much glorification of the SaaS and PaaS that's trying to come out? What's the marketability? Why is that look so shiny? What can we do to make sure that things look even across the playing field?
Great question. Chris.
I have a question. We talk a lot about IT modernization, but it's very rarely about IT being an issue. I would be interested in in the trenches where the rubber meets the road, whether it's people and policy. What do you see as the real obstacles when forcing this change?
Yes.
Good question.
That was great. Great question.
How did you overcome cultural inertia to containerize?
Ooh, very similar. Yes. Okay.
Culture for containers. I saw another hand here. We'll take one more, and then we'll.
Have you run into some legacy types of applications that don't lend themselves to containerization?
Legacy apps and containers. And do containers solve all for legacy apps? Yes.
Identity management, when you're looking at it in the cloud, on-prem, all over, how do you manage that across different parts of the organization?
Right.
Okay. That's a bunch of really great. We've got one last one, and then we'll sit down and do a real chat here.
What advice would you give to other agencies moving
Oh, that's probably my favorite question.
Yeah.
All right. So
Okay.
you see a lot of great questions in the room. I'm not a lazy moderator. I didn't just have them do my work. I like to know what's on the mind of folks, and hopefully we can hit a couple of those topics.
Right.
So let's start with all of this great activity that's going on in IT modernization. We have a report that came out last year that was focused on consolidating networks, on rationalizing, on cybersecurity. We have this focus on several areas like customer experience and service delivery, network rationalization, contact center modernization. We have some new funding for in the Modernizing Government Technology Act. So we have a bunch of things going on here, and maybe we could just start with, what's your favorite piece of it, or maybe let's start with the network and consolidation side, the kind of fundamental stuff.
Right.
That might be a fun place to start.
All right, so for all the network engineers out there, I'm sorry to say the network transformation part is not my favorite part. So that actually is CX UX. But on the fundamental foundational part of these bodies of work that the White House is trying to drive across government, the first thing I'll say is some of this work has already been done very effectively in other agencies, and it provided the framework, like Nick mentioned at the beginning, for some of the text that came out on guidance and direction on how to do this. Why should agencies start there? They should probably start there because if you put new and emerging technologies on aging foundational infrastructure, it is a roadmap for failure. There's a fundamental disconnect between the technologies between the two. At GSA, we started with foundational transformation to say, do we have the networks necessary to run latest emerging technologies? The answer was no. We had multiple networks. We didn't have clarity across the boundaries of those networks. And so we did a fair amount of work to consolidate those, both logically and physically. And that created the foundation for a lot of the additional work that came down the pike. Then we went the next stack layer up and said, we're going to look at our server infrastructure and we're going to virtualize the heck out of that and make the most dense server infrastructures and architectures that we can, and know what we have and manage what we have very well, and weed out duplication. And from there, that provided the foundation, both the intellectual foundation and the operational technology foundation necessary to start some real transformations. And what I mean by the intellectual foundation is once you know what you have and you've made efficient the foundational levels, then you can make good business decisions on how do we transform. Do we transform stuff as it is out to the cloud, or do we get rid of what we have and transform business process directly to SaaS providers and PaaS providers and things like that? And then on the technology piece, we're able to then say, our house is in order. Do we have we now have the ability to plug in a modular way new and emerging technologies like containers and things like that, and they're going to run effectively instead of having a massive mismatch there.
Yeah, and so the first part of the IT modernization agenda is really on cloud, right? And we were talking backstage, and you were telling me this fantastic stat that I don't think it's widely known about how far GSA is in moving your workloads and apps to the cloud.
Right. Right.
Is
this where I tell people?
Are we allowed to,
yes.
to share?
So right now we're at 44% of our infrastructures are in the cloud. And by the end of this year, we'll be at 48%. That's about 6 standard deviations ahead of the federal average. But at the same time, we're redefining what cloud is. Historically, cloud meant a thing, IaaS, PaaS, SaaS. I'm choosing to be a bit more agnostic and saying the things that are in the cloud are bodies of technology work that I'm not doing anymore, that I'm consuming as a service outside there. And when I open up the cabinet doors and look at it that way, the percentage is actually much higher. As a CIO, if I'm directed to drive things to the cloud, that neuters me as a CIO a fair amount. Instead, because I take a broader view, I'm able to say what's appropriate for an infrastructure as a service or a software as a service, but also what's appropriate as a managed service. Where should I consume some of that? Or what's appropriate, what business processes are appropriate to move to a shared service where I'm not doing anything other than just cutting a check for a business process. When I look at it then the percentage is much higher. But that's really a true 21st century CIO way of looking at what is cloud or what is done outside of your facility. It allows you to focus on your core mission areas.
Yeah, we've been talking about cloud first and pushing cloud. I mean, certainly in the Obama administration and now in the Trump administration, there's been this big focus. But to be getting close to 50% and arguably higher, depending on how you're counting, compared to high single digits, 10% of I don't know what the stat is. You sit on the Federal CIO Council, and so you see some of the challenges. It's really fantastic, and I don't think this is as well known in the DC community. Maybe the actual doers who are out there doing it understand kind of how much progress you guys have made in a few short years. Right. It really is fantastic, and it's not cloud for cloud's sake, but it is for the ability to be faster, deliver better customer experience, both to your stakeholders and to the American citizen. Let's talk a little bit about Agile and DevSecOps. There's a lot of focus on getting away from waterfall and kind of writing requirements for years, procuring for years, building for years, and then in year 10 or year 15, we touch a user. And that's kind of why we have these billion-dollar IT failures in government, frankly, way too often. And GSA, both in your shop and in the 18F group, or now the Tech Transformation Service, is known for putting users at the center. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about your thoughts and experiences there.
Great. So having great technology does us no good if we're not impacting the business mission of the agency. And one thing that I found, I saw this when I worked out in the private sector, and definitely see it in government, is that the pace of change in the business world, it's pretty hard to keep up with technology. And one thing that when we look back over recent history, it's safe to assume that the pace of change in the business world will continue to increase and get more rapid. And unless we can deliver technology that keeps up with that rapid pace of change in the business world, we find ourselves not very relevant very quickly. And we then become a lag on business rather than an enabler of business. So the rapid pace of change in technology has afforded us some abilities to stay in lockstep with the changing business before us. And DevSecOps is one of those things. You know, we've been doing Agile. We've had 3 or 4 different flavors of Agile running in GSA now. And we've been doing it since late 2011, so for a while. We saw some of the good associated with it. We also saw some of the challenges, especially on the organizational change management side, and have been able to work those out over time. But with our use of DevSecOps now, what we find is that even if the business does change, the business requirement changes right before you, we're able to stay in lockstep with those changes, because you're not making 5-year, $50 million investments in a technology where the requirement is stale when the partner begins to build against that requirement immediately, and then is really stale at year 5, and you have to make an expensive course correction to get the technology back in line with that business. Instead, if we're doing iterative builds and incremental investments, and that's a key part there. You know, we're not going to make a $50 million investment anymore. We're going to make a $500,000 investment over a 6-month period with, you know, 6-week sprints built into that, and then make a decision at the end of that 6 months to either double down on that thing if it was a good idea, pivot away in a different direction if a small change will derive greater value, or stop the investment wholeheartedly if you're not getting good results out of that. It can be done in government. We're doing it here in government, but it takes massive, massive change within the government and also with our partners. You know, the current model, when we make 5-year, $50 million investments, the government is taking on most of the risk there, not our partners. Our partners have been very clear, our industry partners have been very clear with us that they want to partner with us, that they want a true public-private partnership. Part of that is you gain some of the benefit, but also you carry some of the risk. And if you have 6-month engagements, they can't price that, they have to price that risk in a bit different because they're not guaranteed 5 years of work. but it also drives innovation into the entire process because it keeps people hungry. They know they have to win the business every 6 months. DevSecOps is a key component of all of that, because if you're delivering shorter and you're staying closely aligned with the business, because in those sprints the business is there, security is there, the deliverer is there, the writers of the code are there, then you're able to manage out that risk and say, we're going to march to that 6-month goal, and we're going to take those incremental bites over 6 weeks and do that.
So we got a lot of great questions about containers. Most of the people are here today because they are fired up about containers. They're using containers. Maybe they're modernizing legacy apps and bringing them to the cloud. Maybe they're doing DevSecOps. There's a bunch of different use cases for containers. You guys have really been early adopter of containers and seen some real value. I'd love your perspective on containers and kind of what are the use cases that get you excited, and maybe you could give an example from a particular GSA project.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, we've been using containers for 2 or 2.5 years, almost since the advent of those things. So one of the business missions of GSA, we're somewhat uncommon in the federal space. I'm a IT provider for the businesses of GSA, which is acquisition and buildings and technology and things like that. But then we also provide technology outward to agency partners, and so we're able to try stuff internally and then scale them out to our government partners. With containers, our first steps into that realm were based on new builds. We're building a new thing, and we wanted to build it so that we can move workloads and move certain portions of the technology stack between cloud service providers or from cloud service providers internal to GSA and back out, and saw some really great outcomes because we were one of the early adopters there. There's always first mover risk. It also gave us an opportunity to go, oh gosh, how do you scan? How do you do security scanning inside of a container, and work out some of those with some of our partners, some of those problems, and so it's been really useful. Since we've been using them for a while, we've stepped away from just new builds, creating a templatized process to encapsulate a certain amount of the technology stack that you can move around and then build on top of, build at the application layer or database layer on top of that. So we've started to look back towards some of our legacy stuff. And some legacy architectures lend themselves to containerization. As a matter of fact, it's been very helpful to help us get through some of the security issues or security vulnerabilities associated with legacy architectures. If you can wrap it in a container, you can guard against some of those issues. But it's also allowed us, since we do wrap some of those legacy architectures, to then port those workloads off to maybe some more elegant infrastructures. So we're using it for both application types in the organization, and we're seeing some really great effect. One thing that I'm not a salesperson for containers, but one of the values that we've seen is when we can rapidly port architectures and rapidly port applications in and out of various infrastructures, we've found that the infrastructure providers, whether it's internal hardware providers or cloud service providers, they take great notice of that. And that barrier to exit that exists on a lot of architectures, when that's dissolved by using something like containers, they take notice of that, and that impacts their pricing, which is good for government.
Yeah, vendor lock-in is always a challenge, and being able to really be neutral to different cloud providers and be able to move applications and workloads, I think is super powerful. We got some really interesting questions that boil down to what's the secret of your success? And let's talk a little bit about that as it relates to workforce and culture, and both inside of GSA and in the contractors and partners that you work with closely. Pretend I am a new CIO in an agency or division in federal government, and I come to you. I'm sure this happens quite regularly. Say, what should I do? How do I get started? How should I think about it now that I am CIO of some random federal agency?
Yeah, so my first recommendation would be come alongside your secretary and DepSec and earn their trust very, very quickly. And that's not always the easiest thing to do, but a CIO that's not a trusted business partner to the businesses of the federal government generally won't be that effective because most of the risks and challenges, the work of technology in government is profoundly hard, but the great technologists in government and our great industry partners that help us have managed down most of that risk. I don't want to minimize the work of my staff or the people in this room. The work you all do is profoundly hard, but you're really good at it. You're really good at delivering technology. You're really good at delivering technology in a secure way that safeguards privacy and things like that. But most of the risk is with our business side not either not wanting to change things or wanting to be very prescriptive about how they change things and take away the responsibility of technologists to do their job. So I'd say earn the trust of your secretary and DepSec, earn the trust of your major business units, and bring good technology solutions to them so that they don't feel compelled to do so themselves. I think a couple of the questions were focused on how do you facilitate that change. One, I'm going to get highly technical here. As a technology unit, don't suck. That's really going to help. But then do that. Don't suck over an extended period of time, and you start to develop the trust with the business units that you're supporting. From there, you're then able to start to become the technology experts and analysts that the business units need. The first thing we did, even before the infrastructure stuff that I talked about at the beginning of the conversation, the first thing that we did that enabled us to do some of the good stuff we've been able to do at GSA was we got leadership support from the administrator of GSA and told them what strong leadership would look like in forcing organizational change through the entire organization of GSA. And then we consolidated our shop. We went from 27 CIOs, bureau and business-specific CIOs, to one CIO that had the authority to move the technology stack in the organization. And then that CIO, the great Casey Coleman, who came before me, spent a massive amount of time talking with the business about her vision and getting their input, and then said, I'm not asking for your support for this whole thing. I'm asking for your support for one thing. Just pick one thing, and then you have to deliver on that. And then that turns into 2 things, and then 10 things, and then 100 things. So that's where the risk is. It's on the OCM part of the equation. The technology, we're pretty good at that. We're pretty good at that.
But GSA is awesome at it. I think some other federal agencies, some in the room, are catching up, and there's some really great folks in the room. Let's finish off with workforce and folks, because I think when I talk to CIOs, it's always this question of how do I attract, how do I train, how do I keep some of the great folks, and there are new skill sets as we move to continuous integration and deployment, as we DevSecOps, as we're new technologies like containers. I'd imagine that one of the things that GSA's got going for it is you are doing some really cool stuff, and you are a leader in the federal government, so you attract a lot of great talent, both in your shop. You have some really great folks with Naveen and Kurt and many others. 18F, you have a great set of private sector folks that are coming in for a few year stints. Right. How do you think about this across the enterprise and being competitive with the private sector and with other federal agencies?
Yeah, so there's 2 main points I want to drive home here. One, increasingly the technology workforce of the 21st century is more focused on meaningful work, work where they can have an impact, where they can see the fruits of their labor, not just in a paycheck, but in meaningful change, and government is a great place for that. The mission of government is compelling, and it's interesting, and there's very few places where you can go to work, do a good day's worth of work, and then go home at night and say to your significant other, or say to the people you go to church with, or that you run in at the grocery store, I did this and it helped you. And that's a very compelling thing, and putting that at the forefront of your discussions with prospective candidates is an important part of what of attracting a 21st century workforce. So I mentioned at the beginning that we started with a consolidation activity. One of the things that we assessed when we took a look at this workforce that we had joined together, this technology workforce, was that we had a lot of technology skill sets, but not all of them mapped very well to the skill sets that we needed to run 21st century infrastructure and technology. So we immediately set about recruiting the right people to do that. Part of that was standing up 18F and places like that. But part of that was also taking our existing workforce who understood the basic building blocks of technology and giving them time and space to learn the new technologies and to train them. Technologists who understand the basic building blocks of technology, who understand UX, CX from the beginning, who understand customer relationship management with the businesses you support. That's 80% of the battle. The technology that you're wed to or that you do every day, you look at anybody who's been in IT for more than 20 years, they're like a chameleon. They've changed themselves 10 times in that time because of the rapid pace of change in technology. So it's just more of the same, laying out a roadmap to say, and we'll continue to make that investment into you so you can stay current with new and emerging technologies, and you're going to be a valuable part of the workforce.
It's really a treat to have you here. We're going to wrap up now. We have such a great day, but I think you're a testament to nice guys finish first. So it's kind of if I pretending that I was a new CIO in government, I think keeping my head down, really empowering great people and attracting great people, just being laser focused on outcomes and being a trusted partner. There's so many great things that you do, and what's fun about GSA is not just in the delivery of real estate and acquisitions, but that you're a trusted partner to so much of the federal civilian government. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of what you've been doing already has been baked into the IT modernization agenda for the administration, and why I'm sure your phone is ringing off the hook from other CIOs in government on how to get stuff done. So again, thank you, David, for all that you do and for coming out here today. I'm excited to stick around and talk to you all later. So thank you.
Thanks, Nate.